Rufus, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Deepak. I hear a lot about you, and they say that you really know your business, that you're a tracker. Are you a hound dog or a dash hound or what? You're a tracker.
Thank you so much. I'll take that as a compliment.
Oh, take it as a compliment. Oh, yes.
Well, with that, let's just jump into a set of random questions I have for you. The first question I have for you is, if you were the governor for one day of North Carolina, what would you do?
If I were the governor for one day of North Carolina, I would do away with some of these stupid laws that we have that are old and antiquated and make no sense, like the one that is now being thrust upon Attorney General Josh Stein, which was a law in the 1930s. I would gather the legislature together and say, we're going to clean up these statutes and get these old antiquated laws out of the way.
Good answer. If you had to change one rule in the government process, what would that be?
That would be allowing too much delay. I think there's far too much delay in government. And to add to that, part of the delay is we don't have as much personal contact in government as we used to have because of technology. I think technology has worked against personal contact. And I think to have good government, you must have person-to-person contact.
Why is it important for the youth to be in government relations?
For youth?
Yeah.
Because that's the single most worrisome thing about me now today is how little the young people are interested in government. Our school classes do not teach enough civics. They do not teach enough history. It used to be a requirement that you had North Carolina history. There should be constitutional government, because every moment of your working and your waking and your asleep nights, something about government is touching you, and why not be a part of it? And I think we have one of the poorest voting percentages of any civilized nation. I don't understand that. We have far too much news now, Deepak. Back, say, when I was a boy growing up, or even in Watergate, think of Watergate. You had the Watergate hearings were carried on the 3 networks and public television. That was it. There was no such thing as other channels and all that sort of stuff and social media. No one had ever heard of a cell phone. And I think a lot of this helps all of us, but I've found that the technology in my estimation has cut down on people's ability to learn civically. Now, I couldn't do my job without all the stuff that comes on this little thing here we call a cell phone. It's amazing. Most of my law practice is done on that cell phone. But on the other hand, social media has become, on both ends of the spectrum, so unbelievable that people are getting bad things and things that are totally wrong. And you can't blame either the left or the right on this, because they're both guilty. And everybody wants to find something wrong with somebody that doesn't agree with them. Well, you need to stop and listen, because something that somebody on the other side says might just have some sense to it. I know you didn't ask for a long discourse on that, but you asked a question, you're going to get more than an answer from me.
That's okay. What is the best advice you've ever gotten?
The best advice I ever got from Senator Ervin, my wonderful mentor, was do your homework.
Nice.
Whether you are lobbying, whether you're practicing law, whether you're a minister, or whether you're a business person, do your homework. Prepare yourself for whatever you're doing.
What is your favorite hobby?
My favorite hobby is gardening.
Good.
I'm on a garden show called The Weekend Gardener. which comes on every Saturday on WPTF 680 AM from 8 o'clock until 11 o'clock. I learned gardening from growing up on a farm. And it's not that I know all of the technical names or all of the Latin names, but I learned my gardening from being firsthand on the farm and what my mother and father taught me. So it is my peaceful days, my respite, my time to go cool down and get a perspective on life. And I cannot wait for this hot season to get over with and get into the fall of the year.
I guess, is that the answer? If I would have to ask, what would you be if you weren't a lobbyist? Yeah, a gardener. Is that the answer then?
Well, I think I would always have gardening in my background. If I weren't a lawyer and a lobbyist, I would probably want to be around the farm and livestock. When I grew up, I first wanted to go to NC State and major in animal husbandry, and then I got lured off over to Chapel Hill and got infested with that Chapel Hill mania. And I'm sort of glad I did. But it would have, if I had another career, it would have something to do with farming.
So in the whole illustrious career you've had, you must have had a lot of crazy stories. Can you share anything which would be insightful or witty or anything like that?
Well, let's, for instance, I in my career, I became friends early on with President Bill Clinton. When I was Attorney General here, Deepak, he was Attorney General of Arkansas. And we became friends during that time. And when he decided to run for the presidency, I backed him, and most of the other leaders in North Carolina were backing Albert Gore from Tennessee, and I backed Bill Clinton, and he never forgot that. And I was invited to the White House on several occasions. Got to sleep in the Lincoln bedroom one night and had the Lincoln ghost experience. I didn't sleep much. It was so wonderful. And I watched ball games with President Clinton, and he has called me on my birthday every year for the past 10 years. But there's a little story about one time. My father died, and the president heard about it. President Clinton heard about it. And my mother, we lived in a little country town of Boone, North Carolina. And at that time, my mother still had a rotary dial telephone, the zing, zing rotary. Mm-hmm. And they said the president will call at 4 o'clock. And so the family is all waiting around because this is a big thing for the most powerful man in the world to say he's going to call. And the phone rang, and it was President Clinton on the line. And he said to me, I was sure glad to have you and your wife spend the night in the Lincoln bedroom and have you as a guest. And we thanked him. And then he said, may I speak to your mother? And remember, my father died. So he said, I'm sorry that your husband died, Ms. Edmisten. She said, well, Mr. President, I want to thank you for letting my boy Rufus and his wife Linda spend the night with you. Sort of like you go down the street and spend the night when you're growing up with somebody. I thought it was funny. And she said, also, I want to thank you, Mr. President, for making my younger son a United States Marshal. Well, it's the habit of folks that die in the mountains and out in the country that folks will come by with all kinds of food and goodies when there is a week of mourning. So my mother's talking to the president, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and this voice comes on, Aunt Nell, this is Cousin Ruby with a cherry pie. And my mother said, goodbye, Mr. President, I got to go. Ruby Michael's at the door with the pie, bye. And I grabbed the phone before it hit the floor, and I said, Mr. President, I'm so sorry that my mother hung up on you. And he said, well, that's just like my mother would do. And about a week later, I said to my mother, I said, Mama, do you know that you hung up on the president? She said, well, Ruby Michael was at the door with the pie. Just some little fun. All kinds of funny things have happened along the way. Being
She
So
had she had her priorities straight. That's
she had
right.
her priority state. Yeah, cousin Ruby Michael had gone to the trouble of making cherry pie.
Yes, exactly.
She was going to receive it.
Yes, pie comes before president. Okay. Well, that was such a
One time the
funny.
president asked me afterwards, he said, "How was that cherry pie?" And I said, "It was a great cherry pie, Mr. President."
That's a funny story. Thanks for sharing that. The last question I had for you for the quick round of fire is, if you had the time capsule and you could go back to any time in the past, which time would you be willing to go to?
I would go back to my childhood and my early high school days. I wrote a book, and I spent about 2/3 of that book talking about my early childhood. I wrote a book that's called "That's Rufus," and you can get it at Amazon. And I would go back to that time now and relish all I did of having. Now, I worked hard on the farm, but everything made a difference then. You didn't have so many choices. When we got to go into a swimming pool, it was in the river. I had rides around the mountains on a horse racing my cousin who lived in the farm next door. I would go back to those days of growing up in the mountains of North Carolina.
That's a perfect segue. Let's jump a little bit into your childhood. So, where did you grow up? And you already told us, what your childhood was like, but were you interested in politics back then?
Well, as I got older up into high school, I would go to the courthouse a lot. I have to admit that there were times when I skipped school to go to the courthouse when they would have only 2 terms of criminal court a year, because it was a very rural country town. And I loved the oratory of the lawyers. And I thought, oh my goodness, I liked that excitement. And when politicians would come through town, I would be there and to listen to them. And one of them was Senator Ervin, who lived in Morganton, 2 counties down from Watauga, my county. So I was interested, but originally I was more interested in going to NC State University and majoring in animal husbandry than I was getting into politics. And then, as I said, it all changed when I went to Chapel Hill. I lost the desire to go into animal husbandry and decided that I would love to do something in government, and got my chance to go with Senator Sam J. Ervin, a great icon in North Carolina.
And I see that you also got a law degree. So right after you graduated from North Carolina Chapel Hill, you decided to get the law degree and you went to George Washington University, or was it after you took it? Did you take
When
a
I
break?
left Carolina, with my degree at Carolina, I went to Washington, D.C. and entered law school, George Washington University, as a night student. They had a great program there. And I remember one of my fellow students at that time was Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, who was taking law school at nighttime. Mm-hmm. And that first year, I taught the 3rd grade because I didn't have a job with Senator Ervin. So I taught the 3rd grade during the day, went to law school at night, then got on the payroll with Senator Ervin and continued my law school 5 nights a week, 4 seasons a year. And it was somewhat difficult. But I did not end up owing huge debts like these poor suckers today, which I find just astoundingly awful at the price of any kind of higher education, and especially law school or med school. You're going to spend more of your life paying that off than you do for a home. So I lament that. I think it's horrible, but I got my law degree at nighttime, worked full-time during the day, and passed the North Carolina bar, the Virginia bar, and the North Carolina bar. Now, that's not a bar where you can get a drink of wine. I'm talking about the license for law bar.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard there are 2 bars.
Yeah.
So after you graduated, how did you said like you worked for the senator. So how did you run across that position?
Well, because I had been there already on one of his committees, and he was proud of the fact that I was going to law school because I learned more from him. I was his driver as well. When he would take a trip to North Carolina to somewhere, I drove Senator Ervin, and I learned more from him about the law than I did in my entire law school, and especially constitutional law, because he was such a master scholar. He knew so much about the law, and they knew not to tangle with him on Capitol Hill when it came to the Constitution, because he knew it backwards and forwards. And that was a great deal of my training came from just being around Senator Ervin.
And if you had to like turn back the clocks, how would you suggest someone who, if they are interested to get into government relations or public policy, what do you think their first step should be?
The first step should be to prepare yourself first in the humanities, something in history, learn how to write. Writing is a big business of knowing how to write a cogent sentence. I like the degrees in political science are fine, but history is good, philosophy is good. You don't need to be a rocket scientist unless you want to be a rocket scientist lobbyist. But the main thing is preparing yourself, and then attach yourself to someone who can teach you something, and someone to whom you can look up and admire and learn to lobby, and learn the best practices from some of the old timers. One of the best lobbyists I think you've got now is my former partner, Thomas More. Thomas More learned a lot here. He gives me great credit in saying I've taught him how to do it. And he's one of the finest lobbyists in the North Carolina General Assembly today.
A mentor probably makes
a mentorship is something I highly recommend.
Yeah.
And you don't have to start at the top. You're not going to get to start at the top.
True.
Because no good lobbyist is going to send a tenderfoot over to speak to the chairman of a committee, not knowing whether they're capable or not.
Very true. So after you were worked with Senator Sam Ervin, you became the Deputy Chief Counsel to the Watergate Committee. So can you tell us, what was your role there and how did you get that position?
Well, Senator Ervin needed someone who knew how the Senate worked. I had been with him for 10 years, almost 10 years prior to Watergate. I knew the ins and outs of the committee system. I knew how the Senate worked. Sam Dash was chosen as the chief counsel of the committee because he was a law professor. And even though I might have thought so, I wasn't qualified at age 31 years old to be the chief counsel of the Senate Watergate Committee. But my role was to make it work, to keep it running, to be the conductor of the train. And Senator Ervin depended on me to make sure it worked well, helping hire people, helping move things along, questioning witnesses, and sort of keeping things in track, because the committee was built up almost overnight to over 100 staff members who were doing one of the most critical historical reviews in the history of the country. Far few things have ever exceeded Watergate. Even I think the January 6th committee today is certainly not the same as Watergate, because I may be a little bit prejudiced, but they're two different things. So my job was being Senator Ervin's deputy. Whatever came up, I better handle it.
So after you worked there, you also became the Attorney General, and then you were also elected as the office at the Secretary of State. Can you tell us, having worked on the other side of the table, and now you're getting into government, you are in government relations, how is it different?
Well, say if you're in the enforcement side of, we're going to talk about being a good lobbyist. If you're in the enforcement side, you have complaints sent to you by either the Secretary of State or someone like that, and you investigate. And then it was always my proposition that someone, if they weren't just brazen in trying to absolutely defraud and make up big lies, that it was my job to get them into compliance by a friendly conversation. I can remember picking up the phone many times, Deepak, and saying to someone, look, you might have forgotten to register, but you better think about, do you mean I had to register for that client? That's what the law says, and I know you meant to, and I would suggest that you go ahead and do that. And many a time people thank me so much where they had no intent of doing that, and that helped me both when I was Secretary of State too. I tried to do the same thing because you had the lobbying laws directly under the Secretary of State, which they still are. And I emphasize getting people into enforcement. Now, if there have been a couple brazen cases of some people that just simply decided that they weren't going to register and they didn't do it, and then there've been some indictments and some prosecutions and some convictions, very, very small, because most people just don't know how to do it. And people all the time come to me saying, how do I become a lobbyist? And I say, well, you have to first get a client. I know, and that sounds so simple. You can't go down and say, I want to lobby. It's amazing how many people pick up the phone every week and say to me, where do I go to register to be a lobbyist? I said, you don't register anywhere. You first get you a client, or a client that wants to use you, and then you go do all the requirements of registration, et cetera. And that's a shocker to some people, because they think you go sign up to be a lobbyist and somebody's going to pick you and say, well, your name is Deepak, I'm going to make you my lobbyist. And you got to have something to sell too. If you're a lobbyist, you've got to do the kind of homework I'm talking about. Be prepared. My specialty right now is lobbying state government, not mainly the legislature, but state government. And you require, if you lobby state government, which a lot of people think it only means the legislature, not so. If you try to use influence on behalf of a client in any governmental entity, you must register as a lobbyist if you are paid to do so. And my emphasis right now is working with clients who want to do government contracting, who want to know if they're in compliance with government contracting, who have something that they find of grave difficulty with an executive branch of the government. And my experience as being an Attorney General and Secretary of State have just been invaluable in knowing how to navigate the cobweb of the intricacies of all state government. And that's how in the past few years, I have mainly concentrated on that. And there are very few of us in that business.
So how much do you think personal politics plays in the role of you being a lobbyist?
Well, it has played a great deal, because when you were Attorney General let's even go back further. I made a lot of contacts when I was with Senator Ervin for 10 years. Then being Attorney General for 10 years more, at that time, the Attorney General was the lawyer for all state agencies. The agencies didn't even have their own lawyers like they do today. Everything had to go through, if it was a legal matter, it had to go through the Attorney General. You learn that way how things work in every department. It's somewhat different now, but the basics still remain. And the same thing occurred to a lesser extent when I was Secretary of State, but being involved in the political world and being an elected official has been immensely important to me. I've represented probably more Fortune 500 companies, and anybody in North Carolina, I can count literally over 200 at one time or another, Fortune 500 companies that I've represented. And they change names, they merge, and then you lose with whom you were working, and something else comes along. And I've been very proud to have served about any company you can think of. And my longest serving client is Altria, AKA Philip Morris, which I've had for, my goodness, since 1996. And a couple other clients, and I still enjoy working with them. It's sort of like solving a puzzle. You want to figure out, what steps do I take that are ethical, that make sense to achieve the wants of the client. Now, if the client asks for something that's outrageous, you simply tell them, the first thing you do on a client, whether it's in the legislature or any other branch of government, is if they ask for something that's impossible and you know it is, tell them so. And quite obviously, if any client ever intimates that you're to do something illegal or suggests that you not register, steer away, run like hell. That's a client you don't want to mess with at all. And fortunately, I've never had any client like that, because, and another thing too that I've always said about lobbying, don't downgrade or condemn or talk ugly about your competition. That's a no-no, because I know when I was being lobbied, see, that's the whole thing. I've been on the other side. When I was Attorney General, I was being lobbied all the time by somebody wanting something, and Secretary of State, somebody wanting something. And when someone would come in there making their presentation totally hinged on knocking and criticizing and trying to bedevil the competition, I was put off. So that's a good lobbyist will never do that. A good lobbyist will give their point of view on a matter, and if asked, well, what about the competition, will tell the truth as much as they know. And sometimes I will even say, now I know that I've got competition here. I hear their strong points, and I think here are maybe some of their weak points, but never a personal attack on one of your rivals.
That was a good suggestion you provided. In the whole illustrious career you had, you must have a lot of moments where you are very proud of. What is the most proudest moment of your career?
You say partisan?
Proudest. The one which you are proudest?
Hardest?
Proudest. P-R-O.
Proudest.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the proudest. Well, one of the proudest was one time I was able to take this company that was not very well known in North Carolina, shall remain nameless at the moment because they've changed 3 times. Not very well known. And I told them, I said, now look, you may think I'm just trying to do work, and I always work on retainers. I never charge for the hour lobbying. That's a bad idea. If you're going to lobby, you should charge a certain amount each month. Is a way to keep, because trying to charge by the hour for lobbying is not my cup of tea. And I told this company, I said, it's going to take a couple years for people to get to know you here, because you're not in the know, and it's sort of a little tight knit in the executive branch of government, especially in the IT world, and that's where a lot of my clients come from. I'm not an expert in IT. I can't even turn this thing on and off we're talking on, but it's a tightly knit family, and if you're not well known, you're not going to get anywhere for a while, and you got to work your way in. And I took this company in a couple of years, and then better year and a better year, and they did better and better and better. And they have landed now, least 3 or 4 multi-million dollar contracts at DOT, Department of Health and Human Services. And it's a good example of a client being patient and taking your advice, not technical advice, but tactical advice. So I'm proudest of that company, and I'm just proud of a couple things where I've been able to achieve something for some clients who were imprisoned and got them back on track a little bit better. That makes you proud, and they come out of the system and they've been contributing to society, and you helped them get on track while they were in the system by working with the system. That makes you feel better.
Nice. With that, we come to the last segment where you can tell us anything which you feel you'd like to share, either about your plans for the future or anything about your organization. Anything goes.
Well, I want to share that my passion is something called the Extra Special Super Kids program, a program I started almost 30 years ago to take kids who have shown the get up and go to overcome some adversity and have a need to help go to college. We put them through a rigorous training. We choose them sometimes when they're in high school. We don't choose kids who've had it made. We're not looking for them. We're looking for a kid who's overcome adversity. We have had over 60 kids in the almost 30-year period that we've had that have had a chance to go to college or community college or some other kind of training that they would not have had before. And I'm very proud of that. I had rather that be my legacy than all those things that we talked about during this interview. I'd rather have my legacy as being a person that helps some kids get a chance. And so that I will, as long as I'm able to climb these stairs, as long as I'm able to breathe and walk, I'll be working. I think a lot of people think you get a certain age, you should, well, why aren't you off fishing or doing something like that? Well, I've got work to do. I've got a lot of institutional knowledge I want to share with people. And you get my age, you don't have to put up with all the tomfoolery. You're able to tell people, no, I don't want to take a part in that. I don't need to invest in that. Just you do what you want to do. And I intend to keep racking her up, climbing these stairs and talking to intellectual people like you.
Well, I don't think I'm half as intellectual as you are, Rufus. You are such an inspiration, not only to the people you are helping, but also to the rest of us. Thank you so much for being on the show. It is such an honor to have you.
It is my great pleasure. You know what you're doing.